Hello and welcome to Tactical Rock 40k. My name's Toby Bennett and I'm currently the top Dark Angels player in the UK and one of the top 100 players in the world. And today we are talking about Dark Angels in the new meta. So what does that actually mean? Games Workshop have this nasty little habit of changing how all the rules work and all the points values really quite regularly, although some argue not quite regularly enough, which suddenly changes the meta quite dramatically. Now, this is probably quite a positive thing because it means that we don't have to deal with some of the horrendous things currently on screen for overly too long. If you're currently playing at the moment, you're probably very used to seeing lots of Catan bringing lots of pain and lots of large Rogal Dorn tanks ruining everyone's day, particularly those of Dark Angels players. We kind of want to understand how quickly you can adapt to those new metas because when you switch across, it can be a bit of a wild west, and it's really difficult to make sure that you're nailing exactly the kind of right list when you're going into your tournament. And oftentimes, if you've got a tournament immediately after a data slate, you just don't have the time to kind of prep, make sure that you're ready for that new meta, and try and nail those key little bits that you maybe aren't quite sure what you're going to adapt to. However, what we're going to do here is we're going to focus when you've started getting that little bit of data coming through. A lot of that sort of early stage of a new meta will come from people going, okay, what does the cool new broken thing look like? And oftentimes that will either be from a new release. So obviously we had the Catans, the new release of the Grizzle Guard detachment. That was also another big one. Or it might be from like points dropping for a certain unit. Really good example for that for us was when we had the Raven Wing drops in points. So that was when the Land Speeder Vengeance went down. Sorry, not went down. It's the Land Speeder or whatever the speeder with the special altar on is called, went down to 100 points and the Land Speeder Vengeance went up to damage 3. That was a big shift for us in our internal balance, but it wasn't really rocking the meta. However, there's other examples where, honestly, it really does rock the meta. I think the best Dark Angels example for that was when Deathwing Knights went from 2 damage AP1 on their maces to 2 damage AP2, and they were also then anti-vehicle, anti-monster 4 up. That was a big shift. That was when suddenly Dark Angels became a real powerhouse in the meta for a good period of time. And suddenly people had to start teching into that -1 damage because you were often seeing lists with 15 Deathwing Knights. Who on earth would play 15 Deathwing Knights, you say? Me. And I certainly leaned into it back when we could do that. That was very early in my kind of like journey, my competitive journey. So it was an interesting period of adjusting from going from a very heavy shooting list where I had played like Triple Redemptor, often sometimes even a Land Raider Redeemer, like loads of different stuff. If you're over in the States, like a Land Raider Redeemer won't sound overly strange, but if you're in the UK, previous to the new UKTC mission pack, Land Raiders just were unheard of because they were so fat that they could just like not leave most of your deployment zones, which is always quite entertaining when you've got a 265 point, I think at that time, model that can't even leave your deployment zone and only has 18-inch ranged guns. Very good combo there, Toby. Genius. We love that kind of play. But let's focus on what understanding that new meta is. Now, the real key thing is understanding the changing strengths and what you need to be aware of. Now, a lot of that is going to be hype. Oftentimes we do see when there's new releases, people go, oh my goodness, look at the broken thing. I think we saw it most dramatically with Votann when everyone was, oh, this army can do X, Y, Z with it jumping out of transports and everything like that. And then people tested it and it fell on its backside. So that is going to happen often, but equally that gives you a little bit of an insight on what you might see in the early days. And then the data that you get from places like StatCheck, which is obviously a fantastic source of information, that'll provide those key bits for you. But I think another part of this is, yes, things do change, and Warhammer is a constantly changing kind of game because new combos get discovered, detachments get rediscovered, everything like that. But we always have this kind of core of evergreen staples that I think really supports how you want to be building your Dark Angels. And I think that's something that we really need to cover, explore what those evergreens are and why they're evergreens, because this video is only going to be relevant for the last little bit of 10th edition. 11th edition might have its own Evergreen datasheets, and also there are changes that turn things into Evergreen datasheets. Now, what that kind of means is, how do we identify what an Evergreen datasheet is? And if it's the first time you've come across that, Evergreen essentially just means datasheets that are always good for your list. And we'll cover them, but one you can probably guess immediately is Azrael. And that's because he's always generating that extra CP. But more on that later. Finally, we're going to go over a new meta list. I have decided to write a new Dark Angels list. Oh my god, shock horror. Imagine, who would do that? And this one doesn't have 15 Deathwing Knights. So I'm going out of my comfort zone, which is very strange, but we're actually going to talk a little bit more about that, because particularly these two horrible monsters that are on screen, the Catans and the horrible Rogal Dorns with their so many melter shots, that kind of makes my Deathwing Knights quite upset. So we want to try and find ways that we can get around that, and particularly how we can try and adapt in this new meta, because in all honesty, maybe Deathwing Knights, even though oftentimes I've viewed them as an evergreen datasheet since their change, it feels like maybe their stocks are going down a little bit, which feels like heresy to say. But I think there's different options that we can explore at this point. So let's jump into it. So what are the Dark Angels' strengths? And I think this is a really important bit that we identify at the start. Like, what actually is good about Dark Angels? What makes us unique to, say, a Blood Angel or an Ultramarine? Like, why are we the Space Marine chapter that you should still pick? And obviously, there is an element of rule of cool in that, because we're here because we love Dark Angels. They're the best. They're the best Space Marine faction. And that is something that I stand by. Equally, in the rules currently, that statement might not ring as true, because obviously Blood Angels have their slightly cracked Rage Cursed Onslaught, and Ultramarines are doing Ultramarine things. Why they have +1 to wound on their oath still boggles my mind, but it's a thing that does exist. But let's talk Dark Angel strength. I also did include a selfie of me back when I had to cut the line from my list, from my Stormlance list, because they took away his reactive move. Deeply upsetting. But it's okay, Lion Dad is back, and we're going to be using him, and he is in the list later, so stick around and make sure that you're watching so that you can see the Lion in the list later. So Dark Angel strengths. What makes us good? Now, I think primarily the first one is that kind of, let's lean into the Deathwing stat check. Now, oftentimes you will see that with 15 Deathwing Knights. And the Dark Angel strength, often the way I like to identify this is by putting myself in my opponent's shoes and going, okay, which parts of my army are they going to be most afraid of? If let's say you're playing teams, what about this list are they going to be discussing, going, okay, I might have trouble with that, put that score down for me. And I think that's the really critical bit of how we analyze our strengths. So obviously we do have that survivability stat check. We've got obviously Deathwing Knights with their -1 damage, 2-up, 4-up. We've got Azrael, who can boost a random unit of infantry to have that 4-up invulnerable save too. And we can also play things like Redemptors, Vindicators, and almost lean into being that 2-up save stat check. And I think the real big thing is, because we have a prevalence of -1 damage, data sheets, obviously, I say prevalence, it's 2, but that is 2 more than a lot of armies, and that's really quite critical. And I think that definitely will help that kind of stat check, because a lot of the time 10th edition has been like a 2 damage meta. It's why -1 damage has been a lot rarer. So when you're going, okay, I'm going to halve your damage output, and then I'm going to halve it again because I've got a 4-up invuln on average. There's a lot more that you can do to prevent your opponent from being able to kill those durable units. So you can lean into that quite a lot with a mix of Deathwing Knights, Redemptors, other survivable things. I think often as I mentioned, the 2-up armor save stat check can be really critical. Just making sure that you're surviving as long as possible. You've got access to AOC, so you can make yourself more durable. You've got access to smoke with a lot of these tanks as well, which obviously just makes them a little bit better. And then of course you've got the Dark Shroud. Remember the name at last. Yeah, you can play the Dark Shroud as well, which obviously gives -1 to hit, and the benefit of cover. And cover's obviously super, super good in 10th edition, so it's definitely something to bear in mind. Now, something that I think is a little bit more relevant in this meta, and something that I've actually quite leaned into, is that as a sort of a Space Marine faction, we have really quite high AP. So obviously we're known as the Plasma faction, the weapons of the Dark Age, all that kind of stuff. So we do tend to have things with better AP than a lot of our other Space Marine brothers. And of course, we've got Lion, who is AP4. We've got Azrael, who's AP4. The aforementioned Plasma. And AP3 feels like quite a premium, to be perfectly honest. And then if you complement that with stratagems like that of Gladius, with Storm of Fire to strip cover and add extra AP, or Honor the Chapter to give lances slightly less relevant, but giving extra AP. Chainswords with AP2 is quite hilarious with Azrael, so just bear that in mind as well. So I think we can lean into that high AP and really look at bullying those other 2-up save stat checks. Really good example of that is things like Victrix Honor Guard, Rogal Dorns. You can probably see where I'm going with this. It's those kind of data sheets that rely on having a very good armor save, sitting in cover, and just using maybe AP reduction. So again, your things like the Victrix, Redemptor Dreadnoughts, another great example, Vindicators, kind of everything that we mentioned in that survival stat check already. But equally, anything that like forces a custody onto its invulnerable save, suddenly those very expensive, I say very expensive, it's not really anymore, but those expensive elite infantry are only saving 50% of the time. And every fail they take, they are dying, because usually we have high quality shots behind that, particularly when you're looking at things like the Land Speed of Vengeance, or indeed, obviously, the Lion. Now, I do think we have access to that fast gun line as well. Now, it's something that I experimented with when there was a bit of a shift towards heavy shooting in the UK meta. You looked at the UKTC maps, and in all honesty, it was a bit of a shooting gallery. They've since introduced another piece of terrain, which has made that a little bit better. But in all honesty, it was just how fast can you go to get these lines to then pump a lot of shots into your opponent's deployment zone. And a really good example of that was the Stormraven gunship. Stormravens can really enable that, especially when they can drop 3 Dev Centurions somewhere and just go, hey, we're here to ruin your day, which is always good fun, especially when you've got a reactive move to jump them back in the Stormraven. But there's lots of different options out of things like Company of Hunters, where because you've got advance and shoot across the entire army, and lots of fast units in the 14-inch moving speeders or the 12-inch moving bikes, if you can find the right terrain to be able to move around, particularly I think GW is a great example of terrain that you can get across, because they're lighter on walls but have more in terms of the base of the terrain feature, which obviously your bikes can drive over, so that makes a lot, and tanks as well, so that makes life a lot easier for those kinds of lists. So the fast gun line, particularly leaning into those speeders, I think is actually quite a strong, powerful list. Back that up with a couple of dreadnoughts, that kind of thing has play. And I think if you look at that in Stormlance too, with the -1 to hit, -1 to wound stratagem for flying and mounted, it can be particularly good. Now, similarly but slightly different here is what I'm calling cheeky mounted fun, which sounds a lot more sexual than when I wrote this. Excellent. So cheeky mounted fun, contrary to what you're probably thinking right now, is actually leaning into the bike stat check. Now, you'll see a lot of like anti-infantry, anti-vehicle, anti-monster, blah, 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 but I'm not sure that I've ever seen any anti-mounted. What you can do is you can lean into that. Let's say, I think the great example that I always use as to why I love Outriders is when I had Lilith Hesprax and her 10 witches charge into 3 Outriders and only kill 2. And that's because Lilith is anti-infantry 2 up. So if you're seeing a lot of things like that, so for example, Death Guard, if they're using loads of those flamers, suddenly let's say we lean into that Ravenwing vibe. We've got loads of Ravenwing Black Knights. Let's just say, for example, let's hope that they're getting a refresh soon or a refresh in 11th. Suddenly, those bikes can speed in, deal serious damage to those kind of marine bodies, or to be perfectly honest, anything that is anti-infantry tends to be reasonably soft to plasma. And there's a few examples where that doesn't ring true, but luckily the way that the data sheet is currently for those Ravenwing Black Knights, they could deal with it in different ways. But suddenly that kind of that cheeky mounted fun can result in both boxing your opponent in because you've got the speed to get there and cause lots of trouble, move blocking them, stopping them being efficient, taking them out of play in the game, really useful little trick there. And suddenly you're able to then back that up with a decent gun line and not too bad combat. But to be honest, this is just another kind of survivability stat check, but it's just very different to the traditional Dark Angels stat check. So those are some of the key Dark Angel strengths that I think you really need to be thinking about as you move into these new metas. So what to watch out for? Now, currently I've put that meme in because who's bringing the biggest gun? That is what we're looking at the moment. So this meta is a really good example to discuss that. Who is bringing the biggest gun is intrinsic when it comes to the kind of meta where you're seeing lists with 5 Catan, 2 Rogal Dorns, a couple of Rep X's, all that kind of stuff. That's just people doing an arms race where they're just trying to get bigger and better and more bang for their buck. So that's what we're looking at the moment, in my opinion. We are who can bring the biggest gun, biggest weapon, all that kind of stuff. That's the meta that we're looking at the moment. But there are a couple of others. Numbers versus quality is a really great example, particularly when it comes to like cheap, fast troops. If your opponent's playing lots of cheap, fast troops with low damage output and you turn up with 15 Deathwing Knights, they'll do what we were talking about the bike list doing, where they'll just move block you and reduce your efficiency, because even if Deathwing Knights kill a lot of units, if they're not scoring any points, then great, they've killed units, but they've not won you the game. And if your opponent can force you into those certain units to reduce what you killing what you want to kill, that can cause real issues. Now, on the flip side, if we're looking at a quality of troops slash monsters, tanks, blah, 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 that's when things can get a little bit dicier for our Deathwing Knights, because if people are bringing high quality elite armies, that might be when people start teching to take down big things. And obviously, if it can take down a big thing, it can probably take down a Deathwing Knight. Now, there are exceptions to that, of course, and the 4-up invuln and the -1 damage do certainly help. If people are leaning into, say, what are they called? The Chaos Knight despoilers with those Gatling guns. Like, Deathwing Knights are fantastic into that particular example, because in cover, they're saving on 3s, they're only taking 1 damage. Sure, you've got a volume of shots, but there's definitely a moment where you've got to think about, am I just going to be facing down the barrel of every time I fail a save my Deathwing Knights, it's a dead Deathwing Knight? Or is there going to be lots of numbers trying to block me off? Now, there is always a sweet spot in there, and a lot of the times that sweet spot does exist because Deathwing Knights have been pretty damn good for most of the edition. So it's well worth just looking out for those key little things of numbers versus quality, because oftentimes you can still play those Deathwing Knights. You just need to nail what's supporting them on the push. Is it a Gladiator Reaper? Let's say your opponent's flying at you with loads of gargoyles. You know, Gladiator Reaper is going to ruin their day. Even their Overwatch is probably going to tear through a unit of gargoyles or something like that. But if you know you've got Catan flying at you, you need to be able to match them pound for pound in the shots. And that's something we're going to be discussing a little bit later in the video when we get to the list. And I think the final choice, and probably most important currently, is to Lion or not to Lion. Is this a meta where the Lion can be efficient? Are there lots of tanks without invulnerable saves that the Lion can really get into, use his strike and damage them massively? Or are there lots of marine style units that you can use his sweep and cause real problems to? Are you also looking to get into combat lots, or are you sitting back shooting? Another really good example for this, is it a heavy combat meta? Are people going to be running at you and that you want that vice-versa monster just to hold back that tide and really scare your opponent? Or are they going to be sniping you away from a distance? That will then dictate a little bit more in your playstyle, because the Lion can still stand up in those kind of games where your opponent wants to sit back and just shoot you, because you can lone op him. But you need to understand what's going to be supporting him in that situation, because he can just stand there, like against combat armies like World Eaters. But if he tries to stand there in the face of a Tau army when he's not lone opt, he's probably in trouble pretty damn quickly. So let's jump into Evergreen staples. Now, I've already mentioned Azrael and friends are Evergreen staples. Azrael, the reason that Azrael is just so phenomenal is because he gives you that extra CP. He's giving you those extra resources that you can then spend on your entire army. It doesn't matter where they are on the board, doesn't matter where Azrael is on the board. As long as he's on the board, you're getting that extra CP. And that is just so important to be able to keep that CP economy going, keeping up with your opponent's nasty tricks. And because we have access to some real quality detachments in things like Wrath of the Rock or Gladius, that really does allow Azrael to shine. And you want to make sure that he's surviving towards the end of the game, because you get 5 turns of him, you've got 5 extra CP, which is really quite useful. I'm sure you'll have found if you have played with Azrael and then played without Azrael. Azrael always feels like a kind of an evergreen data sheet where, unless he was, say, pointed to oblivion, he's almost certainly always going to be the first name on the roster, because he not only does he support your entire army just by being on the battlefield, he also massively boosts a single unit. And a great example of that is the Humble Assault Intercessor, cheapest battle line that we've got available to us, and Azrael turns them into absolute beasts. When they've suddenly got Sustain, 4-up Invuln, once again 4-up Feel No Pain to Mortal Wounds, and they've got that massive beat stick as well, supporting that sword in combat to make your opponent take more AP for saves, or just take dev wounds. So Azrael is an evergreen datasheet because not only does he support your entire army, he also supports his unit very efficiently. Now, we're going to go to the top of the list rather than starting at the bottom, and that's with Scouts and the Combi Lieutenant. Now, if you've watched my video on Skirmish, then you'll know why this already, so make sure that if you haven't watched the video on Skirmishing, head over there now, give that a watch, then come back to this video. I'll wait. Cool, hope you watched it already. And now, this is the reason that those Scouts and the Combi Lieutenant are so important, is because they keep your points ticking over and they keep your board presence up. And board presence is so important for Dark Angels because we want to make sure that we're able to occupy the positions on the board that we want to, so we can mitigate that slower speed that we've got with Deathwing Knights, push up, get into our opponent's face, and have that little bit of skirmish so your opponent doesn't run away with the game early, so then we can engage them in the mid game with our efficient heavy hitters and cause real chaos. Combi Lieutenant, another one that's like Azrael in that he just has to be on the board to support your entire army, with the rule where you reroll ones to wound on an objective if your opponent's standing on it. But equally, he's a lone op, which makes him survivable in his own special way. He's got a free reactive move, which is just phenomenal. Reactive moves are so powerful. It gives your opponent 3 inches of grace to try and kill this guy. And that also then gets mitigated a little bit with the fact that he's both got stealth and a 5-up Feel No Pain. So the Combi Lieutenant is really damn handy just for buying you time, buying you points, and oftentimes just sitting on an objective in the open where, say, a JPI would sit in the open on that objective, get blown off and never score. But actually, the Combi Lieutenant means that your opponent's got to come to you, which is a lot more important, a lot more impactful. Catan Captain is another really great example of this because he can sit on those objectives and go, hey, you've got to come at me. You've got to move on from your skirmish stage and commit something of relevance to come in and kill this guy. Otherwise, he's just going to slaughter you, the skirmish that you throw out, or he's going to score me points. So that's the kind of data sheet you want to look for in the Catan Captain. Now, what I mean by Catan Captain is the Gravis Armored Captain in the Gravis Armored Captain with Artificer Armor in the Gladius detachment, which often you will see me using. The Catan Captain doesn't actually ring so true anymore because Catan have moved away from their halves damage to a -1 damage, but the Catan Captain does still halve damage coming into him. So with a 2-up save, a 4-up invulnerable save, and a 5-up Feel No Pain with access to a free strat, for 90 points, he's just incredibly efficient and incredibly survivable with a bunch of damage to attacks, which is really useful. So that's why the Catan Captain is always going to be an evergreen datasheet, because he forces something relevant out of your opponent. And then finally, we've got Vindicators. Vindicators are there because they are fat and they have a big gun. That kind of sums it up. They've got, it's inconsistent damage, but it's high potential damage. And it's always usually pretty decent. And in all honesty, if we aren't taking a bit of risk in our dice game, what are we doing? It's far more fun to be able to do that with that little bit of extra d6 damage, although sometimes you do get 5 unsaved wounds through and then only do 5 damage to your opponent's knight and then lose the game. No, I'm not having a flashback. That definitely didn't happen. Don't worry, take Vindicators, they're great. That happened. But equally, Vindicators, as much as they swing low, they can swing incredibly high. And it just gives you that potential. It puts that little thought in your opponent's brain where what if they high roll? And if you high roll, it might reduce the potential really nasty move that they could make that could cause real chaos to you. So that's why I really like Vindicators. But alongside that, they're surprisingly survivable. Because they're T11, which is a critical breakpoint, as you'll see with the blasted Catan, T11 is surprisingly survivable, especially when you match that with that 2-up armor save and access to smoke. So that survivability for Vindicators just really puts them in a good spot. Now, yes, sure, they could be pointed to oblivion, but for the most part, at the moment, they're actually quite cheap. So it's well worth keeping those Vindicators in. Finally, this is probably what you're here for mainly. You might have just jumped to this section of the video. If you are just jumping to this section of the video, go back, watch the rest of it. I spent time doing this. But here is the new meta list. Now, I'm going to run through this in the context of why this is good for the new meta. And of course, we've got a little photo of the lion being a silly little guy and ruining everyone's day, which is my personal favourite part of playing Dark Angels, is bringing out a big, dirty, nasty Primarch, saving all my 3-ups, I'm manifesting that, and then ruining your opponent's face. So, why the lion in this new meta? Now, we've already mentioned that the fact that people are bringing the biggest, nastiest gun possible. So why the lion? Couple of reasons. The key one being that if that unit that they're bringing to have that giant gun doesn't have an invulnerable save, you can really bully it with the lion. Now, the best example is the Repulsor Executioner, because all you need is half of his attacks to go through, and it's dead. And that 220-point unit just being there, dirt, gone, makes life so much easier, especially in those armies like Ultramarines currently, where they have a very low unit count. Another really great example is obviously the Vindicator. He cuts through that extremely efficiently. Alongside that, you also have Redemptors, which the Lion is very good at killing. So the Lion is in there a lot for the Ultramarines. He's not bad. He's not bad. He's extremely good into Rogal Dorns. He will usually just chop them to pieces. I do really like him in Gladius, which is what this detachment is, because he does, to really sing, he does want access to Lance, and that extra AP just to make a 2-up save, a no-up save, can really help you. We are seeing more Knights lists as well. Now, oftentimes that is Lancers, but that's an adjustment to the new meta because they're there to try and kill Catan, but equally the Lion can cut through big knights very efficiently, especially with that aforementioned Lance stratagem. Then we've got Azrael with Assault Intercessors, Evergreen. They're just great, they're efficient, they hold my expansion. Catan Captain, again, Evergreen. The big thing here, I think, is actually the cut down to 2 Deathwing Knights. Usually you would see 15 Deathwing Knights always. Most of my lists start with 15 Deathwing Knights and Azrael. Now we're cutting down to the 2 because there's more big guns in the game right now. And if there's more big guns, that's problematic. It means that our Deathwing Knights are dying far too swiftly. If they're bringing a gun that can kill a Catan, it sure as anything can kill a Deathwing Knight. You want to make sure that you are being as efficient as possible. And like the fact that we're seeing so many relevant data sheets with -1 damage, Redemptors, Catan, we don't even need to mention those two, they're just so horrible. That causes a lot of problems for Deathwing Knights because suddenly people are teching into -1 damage. Vindicators, so they are Evergreen. However, I'm leaning into them in this particular one because they marry up nicely between the kind of survivability stat check, but also their high AP, and they give me a good damage output, particularly thinking about things like Catan, because as much as they swing, if they swing up, they can technically one-shot a Catan. So, you know, it's unlikely, but it is possible. So Vindicators are certainly something that I would bring. I think they're just very scary, and buying time for the rest of your army with their Vindicators can be really very useful. Then we've got 2 Landspeeder Vengeances, again leaning into that high AP stat check, AP 3, damage 3, twin linked, it's consistent damage output at range, and it's made a little bit nicer by having access to that speed too. Not the film speed too, just the shooting speed too. The fact that they can go potentially 20 inches and then still shoot is dirty as anything, especially when that gun is extremely pokey. So it's very good for getting around corners and just causing havoc for your opponent where they thought they might be safe. And it's always a sad moment for your opponent when you go, by the way, if I deploy on the line with this and go 20 inches turn one, I can see all of this part of the battlefield, and you'll be very sad if I get to put a lot of 3 damage plasma into you. So Hand Speed of Vengeance, excellent. We got the Storm Speed of Thunderstrike in there because I am expecting a lot of tanks like Land Raiders. They are currently very cheap. Repulsor Executioners, another great example. Catan, because we want +1 to wound into those horrible little things. And then there's a few other different knights. Most armies are bringing a few vehicles or a few monsters because they're just damn good, and you want to have that way to deal with them a little bit more efficiently. And having Vindicators wound on 2s, as we've seen from things like Ultramarines, can just really up the ante for them and really just change that swing, because if they're converting the thing that they're meant to be really good at converting, going from 3s to 2s into sort of those tanks, that's going to make your life significantly easier. And then again, just a couple of Evergreen units. Intercessors, holding the backfield, sticky objectives. They're just great. They've got some anti-chaff guns as well. And then finally, Scouts, again, Evergreen, buying me time, buying me board presence, and causing issues for my opponent. So that is the new meta list, and hopefully that gives you a good insight into my thought process as to how we approach this new meta, particularly with this one, which is a great example for a heavy armored, high quality meta, and how we can approach it, especially when a lot of those high quality tanks don't have an invulnerable save, which is something where we can really flourish because we can lean into that AP3, the AP4, all that kind of stuff. Really very good. So I hope you really enjoyed this video. I've really enjoyed making it. It's actually been an absolute blast. If you want to see more videos like this, just head down below, give us a subscribe, give us everything like that. The tiny bit that you do there is massively supportive for me. It helps me get my content out there, and it helps me make more stuff for you guys, which is great fun because let's all be the best Archangel players we can be. So thank you so much for watching, and remember, stay loyal, brothers. We'll see you in the next one. Cheers, guys. Bye.